Hello and welcome to the final week of reading from Obsidian Murders by Nicole Brona. Last week we met George, Tessa's ghostly roommate. We also met Bloodsworth, who is just shy of a 500-year-old vampire, and he's involved in an investigation regarding a young woman whose body was found outside the otherworldly portal. Now, Tessa is, of course, a bit concerned as this portal is near her apartment building, and she's contemplating whether she should possibly move from the area because, of course, she does have some connections and concerns being a human and having some magical abilities, being able to see the otherworldly beings. This week, and this is the final week that I'll be reading from Obsidian Murders, we're on to chapter 5 and 6. Chapter 5. "You had no right to do such a thing," I whispered, fierceness seeping into my voice. Bloodsworth shrugged. "It's what I do for a living, nothing personal." "What do you mean by that?" "I'm a private investigator for Queen Maeve and King Finn Bera, rulers of the Fae." I remained silent, shocked by his admission. The Queen and King of the Fae hired a vampire to work for them? It was unheard of, until now, apparently. "You're that good of a private investigator that they hired you, a vampire, and not another Fae?" I asked, unable to keep the doubt from my voice. Bloodsworth raised his hands in submission. "I said the same thing to them 5 years ago when they offered me the position." "Why are you here now?" I knew the answer, but wanted to hear it from him. "There's been 2 murders near interdimensional portals." 2? I thought there was only 1 in the Cleopatra apartment complex near, I began, but the moment that I realized I outed myself, I slapped a hand over my mouth. "That's one of them. The other happened not far down the street at the park." "So, without a doubt, it's a magical killing?" "Yes. They were both killed by having the air sucked out of their lungs, and then they were stabbed in the chest, so the police officers focused on the stabbing and not the fact that it's impossible to suck the air out of someone's lungs." I leaned forward, wanting to know more. "The first murder happened 2 nights ago. Her name was Samantha Lewis. She was 20 years old. Blonde hair, hazel eyes, going to school to become a massage therapist." I pressed a hand against my chest, trying to slow down my racing heart. "How did the king and queen find out about her murder?" "When word got out that it happened near the portal that most of the fairies use, the queen and king sent me over immediately." "I didn't know there was another murder. Did you glamour as many people as possible to keep it under the rug or something?" "Yes, something to that effect," Bloodsworth replied, unwilling to expand on the topic. "But the details didn't matter. What mattered was there wasn't 1, but 2 magical killings within a few days, all outside highly active otherworldly portals, and the victims were both young women." I hesitated before whispering, "May I ask the name of the second victim?" "Her name was Joanna Griffith. She was 23, with dirty blonde hair and blue eyes. She was going to school to be an accountant. 2 years left." I sagged in my chair, the grief of these innocent women weighing on my shoulders. Knowing their names, their ages, what they looked like, what their dreams were, and how they died made everything too real for me to bear. "Please tell me you have a lead, any lead." Bloodsworth inclined his head. "I have a few leads, but they're not substantial. Why do you ask?" I just don't want them to die in vain and be unable to cross over. Bloodsworth set down his finished cup of coffee and looked at me. That's oddly specific. Oh, yes, sorry. I also see spirits. In fact, I have a spirit stuck to my apartment after his wife, who was cheating on him, killed him with rat poison, and collected his life insurance. Bloodsworth cocked his head in a mixture of concern and awe. You've lived quite a life, haven't you, Tessa O'Hara? I rubbed the back of my neck, uncomfortable. I guess so, but it's not like I can tell anyone about it. No one knows except my parents and the other beings I know. Do you think that's a good life? Well, I never said good, did I? You filled that in by yourself. Yes, well, I started, but cut myself off because he was right. How about this, Miss O'Hara? Work this case with me as an investigative journalist. You'll have exclusivity. I'll make sure of it. Thought you said you glamoured a shitload of humans so it wouldn't be leaked to journalists and the press. Bloodsworth laughed. My apologies. I meant for the papers in the other world. In no way, shape, or form would I allow any of this to reach the human public other than the young women who were stabbed to death. Shock filled my veins. He had just given me a chance to be a real investigative journalist on a silver plate, but I suspected it was only because I could see other beings and Jefferson said some nice things about me in passing. I didn't have that many published articles in the Bethesda newspaper, so how do you know I was talented? The thought bugged me, so I had to ask. How do you know I'm a good journalist? Bloodsworth shrugged. I haven't heard, seen, nor read anything to the contrary. The king and queen will be all right with your proposition? I can convince them. How can you promise something like this when they've never heard of me before? They're not as snotty and petty as the myths lead you to believe, Tessa. Bloodsworth countered, amusement dancing across his face. If I say someone is trustworthy, they listen. After a full minute of sputtering while Bloodsworth watched in quiet amusement, I finally said, But why me? It's not hard to assume you'd want this job. You're a journalist by heart. I can tell by your articles and by how many journalists you follow on Twitter and Facebook. How'd you find my stuff in such a short period? I cried. Like I said before, it's what I do. Now, are you interested or not? If you're not, I must be going. There are things I need to do. Bloodsworth got to his feet, but I reached out to him, brushing my fingers against his cold skin. Wait, don't go yet. I want to say yes, but I'm scared of what you'd want me to do, I replied truthfully. This was going by too fast for me to keep up. 2 women were dead, a vampire wanted my help, and some other stuff. Bloodsworth sat down as fluidly as he did when he stood to leave. Look, you're dedicated, you're naturally curious, but the most important piece to this is you can see other beings. It saves me time if the person I'm working with is a human but can see through our glamour. You know how rare you are? You should use your abilities to your advantage. This is your chance. I gulped down a lump in my throat. Would you have found me and asked me to join you if we never ran into each other? Bloodsworth nodded. Based on Jefferson's words, yes, he likes you. I hadn't had a chance to do much else except focus on the case until you got your friend over there to lie for you so I'd introduce myself. I blushed a deep red and said, I was following my mother's advice when she said I should introduce myself to you. But I was too nervous to go looking for you. I saw you at the crime scene yesterday. You live nearby, I take it? Yes, across from the street from the murder. I didn't sleep very well last night. I can imagine, he muttered, understanding my residential predicament. but that's also in your favor. What? Living close to both crime scenes? That's morbid. Bloodsworth inclined his head. Yes, it is. But that means you don't have to travel far, and it might mean our stakeouts will be in your apartment instead of a car. I held back my natural excitement at his use of us. You think the killer is in that apartment complex? Or yours, or the two other complexes that surround the interdimensional portal. You're assuming this because the first murder is a 2-minute walk from the second murder, I'm guessing. Bloodsworth snapped his fingers. Exactly. Welcome aboard your first murder investigation, Tessa O'Hara. I didn't mind the automatic assumption that I'd be part of his investigation team because it was true. Though it was under sad circumstances and very last minute, I wanted to be part of this case. It didn't matter that my article wouldn't be published for humans to read. All I wanted was to be a journalist. This was my only chance, and for not only that, but to also save people's lives. Chapter 6. Bloodsworth trailed behind me as I weaved through groups of drunk college kids and runners on Norfolk Avenue, heading towards the entrance of my apartment. Streetlights glowed in the hazy winter air, creating a soft yellow glow that followed us until we turned onto Rugby Avenue and headed into Battery Lane Urban Park, 2 blocks away from my apartment. The park was nearly deserted except for a small group of dog owners who were gathered in the tennis court watching their dogs play with one another. Every other streetlight that lined the trail was burned out, which made me nervous even though I had a gnarly old vampire beside me. I cleared my throat and asked, "Do I have to invite you into my apartment?" Bloodsworth laughed. "No, that's a myth." I always wondered but was never sure. The vampiric librarian didn't have any issues, and I never thought about it as a kid. The other vampires the coven knew of weren't an issue either, but I always saw them from afar. But there was this one vampire I accidentally ran across, and, well, he's definitely not like you. How'd you find him? I didn't do any investigative work. It was on accident. He was buying alcohol at the local grocery store, and I could feel that he was different. So I told my mom. She immediately called a few members of the coven and, well, I held up my hand, signaling the rest of the story as unpleasant, an understatement. They killed that vampire before anyone else was hurt, and let the woman he'd kidnapped go with a spell that made her forget the ordeal. So you can tell other beings by feeling? Bloodsworth asked, hands in his pockets. I nodded. Yes, it's a tingling itch under my skin. That's how I can spot werewolves and vampires. The other beings that use glamour, I see through it, like it's not there. The glamour also glows around the other being's skin, so that's a hint if the glamour is incredibly strong, and I'm having trouble seeing the other being for what they are. I turned left onto my apartment street, then turned right and hopped up the steps to the front door, got out my keys, and held open the door for Bloodsworth. The door slammed behind us, but I kept walking until I reached the staircase, which was also next to the elevator. But I never choose the stairs. Oh, that reminds me. The spirit's name is George, but let me introduce you to him before you say anything, I said as the elevator door opened to my floor. He might be a bit put off. I rarely have people over, but he'll get used to you. We rounded the corner and walked for a minute before my apartment came into view. Bracing myself for a ghostly hissy fit, I unlocked the door and turned on the light. Facing me was George, see-through and creepy with his pure black eyes, but I loved his smile, until it faltered into a snarl at the sight of Bloodsworth behind me. Turn that frown upside down, George. This is Thomas Bloodsworth. George bared his teeth. He's a vampire. He investigates magical murders for the Queen and King, and he asked me to be on the murder case. He's harmless, I swear. George straightened his shoulders and eyed Bloodsworth for a moment before he walked into his closet. Interesting fellow, Bloodsworth muttered, settling onto the couch. Would you like some tea or coffee? I can't make coffee like Damien, but it's good enough, I added. I'll have some green tea with a dash of milk and sugar, if you have it, he replied. I shuffled into the kitchen, added water into my bright red teapot, and turned on the gas stove. What have you done so far on the case, other than investigating Joanna and Samantha and visiting their crime scenes? I've already seen the bodies, but I want to visit the morgue after the coroner does the investigation. Before that, I want to visit the second crime scene again. It's still taped off, but I'm sure the residents of the building want the police to wrap up sooner rather than later. You haven't messed with the bodies yet? To rid it of anything magical that can't be explained? I asked, afraid of the answer. No, there was no need to mess with the bodies to get rid of any magical evidence. Everything that happened to them can be explained to mortals. I sighed in relief. But you believe they were killed by another being? Correct. As to why and by whom, I don't know yet. It can't be an other being that's extremely strong because, well, the bodies were intact. First, they had the air sucked out of their lungs. Then they were stabbed, not ripped apart. So it's not a troll. Poor trolls and their reputation. They just can't help smashing things to a pulp, Bloodsworth teased. I'd rather deal with any other being than a troll, I muttered. The smell alone'll knock me off my feet, though that's not very professional of me to say. So who's left? An air sprite? Those things are devilish creatures, George called. He's not wrong. Why would an air sprite want to kill two mortal women? A witch, then? I mused. Before Bloodsworth could answer, the teapot screamed. I poured 2 cups of boiling water into plain brown mugs and added a tea bag to each. After a few minutes of silence, I added sugar in both, milk in one, and sat down on the opposite side of the couch. A witch is a possibility, but it could be any type of air fairy or elf, too. So, is this a roadblock? Yes, it is. Well, it sucks. I have nothing left except my tea getting cold, I said, took a sip of my lavender tea. Do you know if there are any elves, witches, or fairies in this area? There are no elves or fairies around here other than Drusil, who lives at my full-time job. The Fae congregate in Washington, D.C., Chevy Chase, and Tacoma. The witches do the same, and I know like 3 witches, but they're not near here. The witches in Maryland and Washington, D.C. don't talk about their religious views to outsiders, I explained. Bloodsworth pursed his lips and thought. When was the last time you heard about a witch living in Bethesda? A few years ago. She moved to another state for a job. She rarely talked to anyone outside of her coven, so I didn't get to know her. And what about the Fae? Drusil's been around for at least a century, but likes my office building because there's not a lot of iron in and around the building. I think most of the Fae are in either DuPont or Friendship Heights, with the occasional group near the zoo. Whenever you hear about people breaking in the zoo, it's fairies. But they visit Bethesda occasionally, do they not? Oh, sometimes. Bethesda's a nice place to go if you're into restaurant hopping and not interested in the complete craziness and fast pace of DC. The werewolves, though, where do they live? On the border of Bethesda and Rockville. It's called North Bethesda. Bloodsworth sighed. And here I thought there'd be more other beings in Bethesda that would explain the murders. Perhaps the murderer doesn't live in the surrounding apartment buildings and travels into Bethesda instead, Bloodsworth thought aloud. There could be a witch or a fairy hiding in one of these apartment buildings for all I know. I have to see them to know about them, I said. I still think it's an air sprite, or 5, George said. We'll keep that in mind, George, Bloodsworth replied, a smile forming on his lips. Do you work on the weekends? I'm going to the second crime scene at 7 in the morning. No, I don't. I'll meet you across the street at exactly 7. Will you be awake and ready by then? Bloodsworth smirked. Even though I'm not a morning person, I can still be up at an atrociously early hour. I hated being up early. It was apparent by the raccoon under-eye look I was sporting, all wrapped in a thick black woolen coat, black gloves, and a worn-out beanie that used to be a bright, crisp yellow 6 years ago, but was now dull. Bloodsworth wore a black trench coat and hat, along with leather gloves. As I got closer, I could see his nose was covered in sunscreen. Even at this hour you wear that stuff? Better safe than sorry. The sun's rays are vicious to vampires, as everyone knows. Do you burst into flames if you're exposed to the sun? I'd been told by the coven how vampires died years ago, but never directly asked one. Bloodsworth laughed. No, it's like a sunburn. Then it turns into first-degree burns, second-degree burns, third-degree burns, and then I die. If a coroner were to look over my body, they'd rule my death as being burned alive. Wouldn't that make them suspicious, since people usually die of smoke inhalation and not being burned alive? Yes, but at least there's a human reason for the death. Unlike being killed by a witch's spell or dying at the crisp old age of 600. That makes sense. I paused. Wait, what is that sunscreen made of? It's not human sunscreen, is it? No, it's a mix of high SPF sunscreen and magic. I buy the bottle from one of the best healers in the other world once a month. How much does it cost? In human money? Almost $50,000 per tube. Excuse me, what? I screeched. Is that stuff mixed with gold or something? No. The spell that protects my skin from being burned is dangerous to create. Every time a healer creates a tube of it, they're risking their lives. They expel an extreme amount of energy to create the spell that imbues itself in the sunscreen, which ultimately keeps the sun from burning my skin. Bloodsworth explained, My skin itches, but constant itchiness is better than death. The vampire who used to work at the library in Salem must have been rich then. She used to wear sunscreen on her cheeks and nose. Most vampires are rich because of our long lives. One perk of being a vampire, I replied, looking at the yellow tape that cut off the civilians and detectives. Nothing had changed since yesterday, except that the silence was deafening. The body, of course, was gone, but there was still a slight outline of where Joanna's body was found. I'll follow you in. Bloodsworth nodded once and lifted the tape, ushering me forward. I slid under his arm and stood still, watching him move around the scene. I could see the glowing outline of the otherworldly portal a few feet away, but I didn't want to go near it, not knowing what would pop out at any given moment. I took one step, then two, into the crime scene. I didn't see any blood or smell it either, but I had an irrational fear of stepping on something of Joanna's. It'd be rude, disturbing, wrong. I looked down as I walked towards Bloodsworth, who was investigating the back of the otherworldly portal, when I spotted an obsidian ring. Hey, Bloodsworth, what's this? I asked, and bent down to pick it up. Don't touch that! I screamed in agony as the obsidian ring scorched my fingertips. Now we know that there are two bodies They are indeed magical killings. We found out that Bloodsworth works for the Queen and King of the Fae, and things are certainly starting to move along. Tessa, having met Bloodsworth, has a chance now at writing an article and getting exclusive rights to the story, although it won't appear in human publications. As I've mentioned before, be sure to check out Nicole's channel for information on how to order her book, Obsidian Murders, as well as the 2 other books in the Midnight Detective Agency. I hope you've enjoyed these readings, and I look forward to hearing your comments about Obsidian Murders once you've had a chance to finish reading the story. I'll be putting up my review of Obsidian Murders next week. Until next time, remember, stay away from those otherworldly portals. Be well, be safe, and big hugs.